You're listening to the Wrigleyville Nation podcast. Season ticket holders and lifelong fans with neighborhood ties discuss Cubs news and neighborhood happenings. Here's your hosts, Jeremy and Pat.
Hello and welcome to the Wrigleyville Nation podcast. This is episode 327 of the podcast. My name is Jeremy Deemer and I'll be your host. I'm joined as always by my co-host. He's my cousin and he's high atop Wrigleyville tonight. How's it going, Pat?
It's a joyous night in Wrigleyville, Jeremy.
It is. It was a warm Labor Day. I hope everyone's enjoying their day off. We are here working to bring you a podcast. We are going to be talking Cubs, and what a week it was. We'll preview the week that will be to help us unpack all things Cubs and all the happenings. You know him from his fine work at NBC Chicago and his many appearances here on this podcast. Longtime friend of the show. Welcome back, James Neveau. James, thanks for taking time out to talk Cubs with us on your Labor Day holiday.
Yeah, it's been an insane amount of time since we started doing these together. I think it's been like probably 7 years now. It's crazy to think about that. So, and then I was looking at the schedule because I was like, the week that was like, the Reds, the Brewers series was the week that was. Like, it feels like it was an eternity ago.
Yeah, this feels like a 3-week week. And I was thinking the same thing. It was, Jeremy, it was just 7 days ago that you and I were at a Cubs-Milwaukee Brewers game when our friend Mr. Teon was unable to get unscathed through the first inning, gave up 4 runs. Cubs lost the game, and all seemed lost for a moment. But it wasn't the only time that week that all seemed lost. But luckily, in between then, things seemed to go well. And by the end of the week, the Cubs somehow managed to be 4-3, which is what I predicted at the very beginning of the week. It was just a very up and down roller coaster of a week, isn't it?
Yeah, and it definitely did not. It didn't feel like as happy as you'd be with a 4-3 week against these teams.
It felt like 2-5.
Yeah, it did, especially when you the way it started with that Brewers game. We were in the bleachers, and perfect night for baseball. We had to sit through a Christian Yelich home run. That was no fun in the bleachers. But yeah, not a great game. But the Cubs bounced back. A 1-0 win against Milwaukee, and then 3-2 winning 1-run ball games, which will be a theme for the remainder of the week when we talk about the Cincinnati series. But coming away 2 of 3 against Milwaukee, James, that was huge, as you are hoping that Milwaukee was coming in there with an 8-game winning streak, won that first game. They took it to 9 games. And it's great that they were willing to end that winning streak and give the Cubs at least 2 games at the end of that series.
Well, yeah, since it seems like nobody else can seemingly take care of business against Milwaukee except maybe the Los Angeles Dodgers, there was just a cacophony of nonsense surrounding that team where teams would just all of a sudden forget how to play baseball. I mean, I think of the way the Philadelphia Phillies looked against the Brewers on occasion. I mean, it's just been kind of this like nonstop run of teams just suddenly being really bad against Milwaukee. And so it's like, all right, well, the Cubs have to, pull the iconic Thanos gif from, one of the end of the movies where he's like, fine, I'll take care of this myself. And that's the vibe that I had gotten from the Cubs. And yeah, they got off to that appalling start in that first game. And Jameson Taillon has once again, he has gone back into the dark places. And I mean, credit to him both in the Milwaukee game and then not to like jump too far into the future here, but also with the Cincinnati game where he gave up a ton of runs early and then managed to kind of grind it out and like limit the damage to a degree and kind of allow the Cubs to have the ability to come back. But you can only do that so many times without being burnt. And we saw that against Milwaukee. So I think that seeing those kinds of efforts from multiple guys on the team, you think of Justin Steele getting hit in the leg with a ball and continuing to pitch. I mean, you just go up and down this team, this list. And honestly, the mental fortitude on the team has been really good. I feel like this season, it's been a good just kind of feature of the Chicago Cubs. They've been able to kind of deal with some of this adversity. And here we are, they're 3 games out of first place as we record this podcast today. The Brewers are playing currently, not to spoil any of the podcasty magic that's going on. But it's just been interesting watching them kind of grind some of these out and like during struggles continue to win games. To me, that's the hallmark of a team that ultimately deserves to be in the playoffs, and the Cubs have put themselves into a really good position to potentially do that.
I have to note, based on what you just said, James, that apart from Jameson Taillon's 2 starts, in the other starts for the Cubs this week, of which there were, 5, Cubs starting pitching was great.
Yep.
Now, I prefer the Justin Steele approach of just not giving up runs at all, but I know some people like to give up a couple just for fun. But starting pitchers for the Cubs, 0 runs, 1 run, 1 run. I mean, it was crazy. 2 runs, 1 run, 0 runs. I mean, you don't see that very often, and they're doing it not because Marcus Stroman's there or John Lester or anybody like that. It's been through the combined efforts of a lot of guys, young pitchers. Javier Assad, you've got Wicks, who's come up and performed well in 2 starts, and it's just been a combination of people. Kyle Hendricks has pitched well, and this was the thing that we've talked about for a couple weeks now on the podcast about the Cubs without Stroman. The Cubs starting rotation seems awfully thin after Steele. And, to their credit, once they took Smiley out of the rotation, they have managed with mostly younger pitchers, but with a combination of people to kind of get through games and not just get through them like giving up 4 runs, but get through them like giving up 1 or 2 runs. I mean, they've just been really good. But for that, I think this would have been a much rougher week because the Cubs offense until Sunday really did not acquit itself particularly well this week. They went up against some good pitchers, I'll give them that, but the Cubs did not score a lot of runs this week. And yet they managed to be over 500 against 2 potential division winner/leader and another potential wildcard team. So good for them.
Yeah, you did mention that they faced some tough pitching. The Cubs defeated Corbin Burns, Brandon Woodruff, and Logan Webb all in this week.
Yeah,
so
3 top-notch starters.
Yeah.
Now, luckily, we had a Cy Young winner and future Cy Young winner and Justin Steele for 2 of those games. But yeah, it was really good. Now, having said all that, and being happy about winning the first 2 out of 3 in Milwaukee, and the Cubs really took care of business on the first game of that Friday doubleheader, the day game. It looked like we were just going to roll this week. We were 3-1 heading into the nightcap. They had a nice lead in the nightcap, and it was just like business as usual. And then for a period of about 24 hours, it really did feel like the ceiling fell in. And if you went on Twitter, if you want to go back to that time period, it was a rough 24 hours. There was a lot of negativity in the air because the Cubs, who, by the way, since the All-Star break, I don't think have blown any ninth inning saves, right, and lost games, right. I think they haven't, had that happen to them like many teams do. Had a really unfortunate string of outings back to back against the Reds of all teams, and I don't know about you, Jeremy or James, but it was really annoying. I don't like that at all.
Well, the thing we have to remember is that the Reds, like for all their foibles and, the fact that, we look at their run differential and we're like, how in the heck is this team even still within shouting distance the postseason? The fact is they are. And so they too find ways to win games, and they simply did. And I think the Cubs were due for a few duds from a few bullpen guys. They've been riding a lot of those dudes really hard the last few weeks, whether it's Alzolay or Leiter. And I think that we're kind of reaching a point where you're inevitably going to have a few letdowns here and there. But I still think the bullpen management has been really good for the most part. I think they've kind of cobbled together something that has some cohesiveness and it works, and you're getting some production out of guys that maybe you didn't necessarily think you were going to get production out of. But I mean, sometimes you do just kind of have to tip your hat to the Reds in that situation and realize that they are like on the fringe of that playoff spot. And so they're going to find ways to win some games. So that's why I'm totally fine with the results, the 2 out of 3 against Milwaukee. Yeah, it would have been nice to get 3 of 4 from the Reds, but a split still puts you in a decent spot. And you look at the standings, they've built up a nice lead over some of those other wild card teams that are chasing them. And I think that is critically important because then you can really kind of start to potentially zero in on trying to catch the Milwaukee Brewers in the division if you've got your wild card kind of ducks in a row, so to speak.
Yeah, you're right about one thing. Alzolay, has pitched a lot lately, and he pitched on Tuesday and Wednesday, and then he just seemed out of gas a little bit Friday night. And of course, then on Saturday, they had no choice but to use somebody else, so they had to bring in a Leiter, which didn't go particularly well. But again, the Cubs only scored 3 total runs in those 2 games, so I mean that's part of the problem. But to the bullpen, I worry that let's put it this way. The Cubs have shown that they have a couple guys in the bullpen who they can more or less rely on, and Merriweather, Leiter, and Alzolay. Mm-hmm. And then they've got a lot of guys who are just sort of like all over the place. And we saw that with Keegan Thompson, who's now back. He has good outings, he has bad outings. And I think we talked about at the All-Star break, it would have been nice to add one more relief pitcher. Jose Cuas might not be that guy because he walks and hits most people that he faces, but while getting outs in between.
How dare you besmirch the starter of Friday's nightcap in that doubleheader? Right. How dare you, sir?
But yet, it would have been helpful in hindsight and probably foresight if they could have, depending on the price, added another reliever, because this is where the Cody Hoyer injury and some other things, Brandon Hughes injuries, really kind of hurt you, because it's not like the Cubs didn't have guys in the system who they had hoped would be in these roles by now. They just had a series of bad luck with some injuries, and now they are sort of having to do it all, like you said, from a bullpen management standpoint, with a little bit of, I guess fog and mirror and was it
smoke and mirrors?
Smoke and mirrors. I knew there was no fog. I knew there was something else. It was smoke. Smoke.
Well, you're high atop Wrigleyville. You'd be able to tell us better than we could tell anybody else.
Right. Jeremy,
sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. Well, Jeremy, we talked about that a little bit when we saw each other again yesterday. But, it's going to be – the Cubs are going to play a lot of teams the rest of the year, either in hitters' parks or teams that are just good at hitting. And I think how this bullpen manages to acquit itself will go a long way towards determining whether the Cubs are a divisional winner or a wild card.
Well, I think part of the panic this weekend was because the bullpen was doing so well. We were all focused on the starting pitching concerns, like you laid out at the beginning here, Pat, and the bullpen has exceeded our expectations. So it was a surprise to us that we saw that 2 straight games the Cubs were unable to close out the game, maintain a lead. We've been spoiled by the automatic vibes of Alzolay coming in there because he's been doing so well. But
it's funny how you get used to and basically come to the opinion that if you're leading in the ninth, you should absolutely
win.
No question about it, right?
And so you mentioned the Friday loss, and the Friday loss was okay because you expect to split a doubleheader. Sweeping a doubleheader is extremely difficult. Most doubleheaders are splits, and so that was an okay. I expected to lose one of those games, and then the Saturday one was the killer because you get the bases loaded, and then you see De La Cruz coming up, and you're just like, oh, this isn't going to end great. Maybe he's young and he's excitable and he'll get a little crazy and swing at a bad pitch, but no, he just gets a hit and gives the Reds the win, and so that's the ball game. Thank goodness for Sunday because the offense finally showed up, Pat, like you mentioned. We had a good outing. It was 3 home runs in the series from Bellinger. He's a guy who's just doing just fine offensively, and
he has now overtaken Cubs home run leader for the entire season up until this week. Patrick Wisdom, who led the team in home runs from day one until I think the early September. 5 full months he led the team.
And he was out of action for part of that too.
Yeah, he's only played 83 games, but but here we go. Cody Bellinger in 106 games has finally toppled him now. So there you go.
Well, I think before we kind of depart from the bullpen part of this equation, I think that they tried to add a few guys in different ways. I'm glad you mentioned, Pat, the injury concerns they've had to deal with guys like Brad Boxberger, with guys like Cody Hoyer. I mean, those were dudes. I feel like they were kind of relying on having.
And Brandon Hughes was their rookie of the year last year, right?
Brandon Hughes, Michael Fulmer has been injured too. Like they've been dealing with a ton of injuries in that bullpen, and I think that they probably looked at, like, especially a guy like Cody Hoyer. I think they looked at him as like a deadline acquisition type of, lift to that bullpen, right? And then don't forget, they also reportedly tried to get in on the waiver wire action and try to get relievers, but for some reason the Cleveland Guardians decided they wanted everybody. And okay, you know what? No. And now I'm so excited because Pat is so irritated by this. Pat, what do you think of just the straight up waiver claim? Do you think they should have kept the waiver trades? Come on, let's get into this. This is fun.
Yeah, I mean, having this, and this is a sort of I think a post-COVID change in how things operate. But, we used to have the trade deadline, and then after the trade deadline, you would have in August and September, basically, especially in August, you'd have the ability to trade people who made it through the waiver wire. And then in September, it got even easier, although you couldn't use them on your playoff roster. You could still, there were teams that would pick up, really decent players in September, even though they couldn't play in the playoffs, just to get to the playoffs. And that was kind of fun. So, yeah, it is frustrating that this waiver wire situation. And I don't quite understand the philosophy that the Guardians were choosing to follow, apart from, I guess, maybe some desperate thought that they would make playoffs, I guess.
They probably should have considered that before the trade deadline when they traded guys. And
they're 10 games out of a wild card. Like, I guess theoretically they're hoping like the Twins completely collapse, which, I don't think will happen, but I guess that's their only hope right now. And
they're only 5 back of the Twins right now. I think they've still got like 3 or 4 games against them too. So
they figure, it's a couple bucks and, might as well go through it. But for that, I think the Cubs would have been in a really good position, because the Cubs were one of the teams that were both low enough on the waiver wire to acquire players, but also good enough that it would make sense to do so. And yeah, I like the old system better, I have to admit, than this.
It very much chagrined me as well, because I was thinking to myself that, like, it would make sense for a team like the Reds to potentially add a Matt Moore or, a Reynaldo Lopez if they wanted to add relievers. And instead you had teams who are nowhere near the playoffs right now making those additions. The Reds did get Hunter Renfroe and Harrison Bader, so at least they got something. But that, when I saw it was Cleveland, I was like, this has to be a misprint, right? Like, this has to be Cincinnati went out and got these guys. Like, this makes but you know what? I am not in the front office in Cleveland. I'm not trying to get Terry Francona back to the playoffs and what could be his last season. Like, I don't know, man. That was just really frustrating. The Cubs had a shot potentially at a really solid, especially like Matt Moore would have been such a good addition to this bullpen, but wasn't to be there. The Cubs are playing too well, stupid idiots.
If you really wanted to make this fun, you could have changed the waiver wire where for each player that goes through, you have a different criteria for selecting what the order is. So for the first player through the wire, maybe go by record. For the second player, maybe by attendance. For the third one, team with the most doubles.
Like, or just have them like prioritize the waiver, and if you pick one, you go to the back of the line.
You go to the back of the line, like your fantasy team. Yeah.
Like in a fantasy league, right. 100%.
But yeah,
I tend to like the attendance idea myself, but go ahead.
You just wanted to take a dig at Cleveland. I understand.
I do like I do like that Cleveland has the same ideas that the Los Angeles Angels have. I like this that these two front offices are both just completely insane. And
why couldn't they be quitters like the White Sox? Right. Just accept their fate.
Two teams.
Nobody claimed Mike Clevenger either, so the White Sox were still stuck with it.
So
yeah, he
funny.
gave up 8 runs.
Yeah,
in his debut, fresh off the "No one wants me" waiver wire.
Also, very big contract that no one wanted to give him money, which is kind of an indictment of what the White Sox did with him.
Yeah, no, it's the Cubs could have used some help in the bullpen to get them down this last stretch. We will go through what the remaining stretch looks like because it's a lot tougher than we anticipated just a couple weeks ago. But we will get there in a second as we we do talk. We'll finish talking about the Cincinnati series as we also had Mike Tuchman having his first career 4-hit game, and Ian Happ with 3 hits as the Cubs did close out the road trip, the short road trip in Cincinnati, 15-7. So with that,
speaking of offense, by the way, this just real quick, our friend Michael Cerami from Bleacher Nation had posted a little while ago that since August 1st, and he listed the Cubs in terms of WRC plus, basically, and identified that the top Cub hitter since August 1st, Seiya Suzuki.
Yeah, I mean, I saw his WRC plus since that the benching, the high profile benching is like 170. Like he's having,
and that's before today when he had another great day. So he has 7 home runs since August 1st. Understandably, Cody Bellinger is second, 152, with 8 home runs, and then Ian Happ right behind him. With Ian Happ and Seiya Suzuki are going to hit like 2/3 of their home runs after August 1st this year, maybe more, maybe 3/4 of their home runs.
Yeah.
And then, interestingly enough, in 4th place was Candelario, who seems to have been struggling a lot, but I guess not that much because he's a 124, followed by Nico Horner.
Every time I bring that dude up, and I'm like, oh, it doesn't look like Candelario's really feeling it right. I swear he hits a home run. It is like the easiest reverse jinx in history. Mention Jeimer Candelario's name, and then all of a sudden he hits a home run. He's like Beetlejuice. It's crazy, man.
Now, if the Cubs could get Dansby Swanson and Christopher Morel to start hitting again, they would be in good shape. But this gets to the point where if you have a deep enough lineup, you don't need everyone to be hot at the same time, and you can sort of go through these stretches where certain guys are hot, certain guys are not, and then vice versa. So that's, I guess, the positive side of it. But boy, Swanson, who now leads the team in strikeouts, has it maybe it's just my imagination, but it seems like he comes up a lot with men on base lately and strikes out, especially men on third for whatever reason. And it's been frustrating to watch that. Morel has been in one of his, somebody from the Cubs told me before he came up last year, one of the things about Morel to keep in mind is that he runs extraordinarily hot and cold. And I think we've seen a lot of that over the course of his year and a half with the team. And right now we're in the cold phase. But you know what? If he can time it right and get hot the last 2.5 weeks of the season, he can carry this team for a couple games, which would be really nice to see too. So I'm not going to lose sleep over that. But Mike Tuchman was another one who was kind of in a real rut until today. So hopefully that's a sign of an upswing. So I feel like overall I'm pretty bullish on the offense, despite the lack of offensive runs scored this week against some pretty tough pitching. I still think that there's a lot of hope here, and it's nice to see a little bit more power out of the team too, because that's been something that we've always kind of worried about throughout the course of the year.
That's why I think adding Candelario was such an important part of this, because he was a guy who was going to give you a little bit of additional punch, and you weren't going to necessarily have to worry about the feast or famine that you sometimes get with Morel or with Wisdom. And I think that was an important acquisition to make, and the Cubs gave up the piece they needed to make that happen. And yeah, he's been as good as advertised. I think just set a career high in home runs. I think he's up to 21 now for the season. So yes. I mean, that's a solid pickup for the Cubs, and it addressed a very specific need. And yeah, I've been thrilled with his performance.
If I told you the Cubs would have 2 third basemen who would each have 21 home runs this year,
how many home runs?
Would have thought I was crazy.
I would have been like, when did they reacquire 2017 Chris Bryant?
Yeah. So he and Wisdom have been somehow have managed to provide a decent amount of third base power this year.
Mm-hmm. And Alex Canario still has not batted in the 4 games he's been.
Okay. So I guess we have to talk about that, because it's really upsetting people on Twitter, and especially in games when the Cubs don't score a lot of runs. There's just a lot out there. Everybody was excited to see this kid get called up. He came over he was the piece in the Bryant trade after Caleb Killian, right? The other piece, the one that hopefully works. And he's been sitting patiently on the bench the entire time, even through a 15-7 blowout victory although it wasn't a blowout the entire game, I guess.
Yeah,
but,
that was the 8th inning. Yeah. So.
But still, couldn't he have come up in the 9th at some point?
Yeah. Well, you had all three of your
outfielders
come up in the 9th inning, and he didn't replace any of them.
He didn't even come in defensively. So they call up this guy who, by the way, missed most of the season after that gruesome injury he had at the end of last season, where he managed to tear up his knee and his shoulder in one play running to first base. That was awful to watch. But, he came back ahead of pace, and he's hitting the cover off the ball, and here he is, and they call him up and they use a spot on the roster for him, and they refuse to play him. What's up with that?
Honestly, I wish I could answer that question. And I know David Ross and Jed Hoyer both said they didn't anticipate him unseating anybody. And I was just like, why?
Why bring him up?
Why are you insisting on giving at bats to guys like Patrick Wisdom right now or Christopher Morel right now when you could be giving them to Canario? And I know you want to try to get him in an ideal situation, but I thought the entire point of this was that we have this red hot hitter who's already on our 40-man roster. We don't have to make any. By the way, I think there's still one man short on the 40-man. I think they're only correct right now. So you have this guy who's already on the 40-man. It's like, hey, we've got this red hot hitter. Let's bench him for 5 games now. It's just,
he literally could have stayed in the minors and gotten bats.
That's I think that's what frustrates me is that you took this guy who's probably his best, most marketable asset right now is the fact that he is red hot at the plate. He is so locked in, and now let's just bench him and let that completely go away. Like, to me, I get that they didn't exactly have ideal circumstances against the Reds because the Reds had to make a bunch of changes because of COVID, and they probably weren't able to kind of pick a spot to get him in. But the fact he literally hasn't had a sniff of the field in 5 games now, especially as you mentioned, Pat, with a Sunday blowout where you had all 3 outfielders bat in the 9th inning, and it's like you could have given a guy a rest, could have given him an at bat or something. Just the fact that they didn't put him in just is they put Miles Mastroboni in.
They did.
And I was just like, really? I can't even get him here? What's going on?
Why cut Tucker Barnhart, who you have to pay anyway, if you want to just eat a roster spot? You could have a third catcher. I mean, it just makes little sense.
Jay Higgins is right there, man. And
yeah. So well, how about another pitcher, for God's sake? They seem to need those.
Literally didn't have Shane Green pitch until yesterday.
Yeah.
That's so frustrating, man. You call up these guys and then you just are hell-bent on not playing them. It's like, hey, David, you have 28 roster spots right now. You're allowed to use all 28.
And Green is an interesting case because he's a guy who had been a successful relief pitcher 400 years ago, close to 400 years ago, and was kind of a reclamation project. He's been out of baseball for a while, I guess, or at least out of the majors, and they had been stretching him out to be a starting pitcher. So I thought in that doubleheader game we might see him pitch, significant time. Instead, the Cubs wisely chose to wait until the 9th inning of a 15-7 game to bring him in, I guess just to make sure that his arm still works. I don't know. And he was able to throw 9 pitches, 6 for strikes, and get out of the inning. But that's another kind of odd usage of somebody who was brought up, I thought, primarily because he could pitch multiple innings, i.e. as a starter, or at least, in the middle of a game if need be.
Like you said, man, it makes no sense to use him the way that they used him. I know that they've got several guys in their bullpen they can use in that way, whether it's Hayden Wisniewski or Keegan Thompson, or Drew Smiley. I get that. That's totally understandable. But then why did it have to be those 2 guys? Why didn't they? If they were going to use a guy like this, I would have said call up PCA, because then at least you probably see him pinch running or used as a defensive substitute. And you had the 4th-man spot to do it. I felt like that would have been a smarter usage of that spot if you were going to do that, would have been with a guy like him instead of a guy who literally, again, is hitting the cover off the ball. These seem like kind of first worldy problems because the Cubs are in such a good playoff positioning right now, but it's maddening roster usage, and you're going to burn guys out, and you have the opportunity not to do that. And it seems like the Cubs are heading down a bad path with that. We still have several weeks left of the season, guys. We need to be managing minutes, so to speak, and the Cubs just don't seem interested in doing that right now.
No, both all of these examples that we just mentioned. I'm flagging this episode as one of the ones where when we're doing our David Ross retrospective on his season, we're gonna add this to the pile of other things we had from the beginning of the season, where when we dive a little deeper into David Ross's performance as Cubs manager.
Mm-hmm.
Have
you guys gotten any pushback from fans about this? Like, have you mentioned anything on social media? Because I posted on X about Canario not being used, and there were a lot of people who were like, "Yeah, well, you think you know better than David Ross? This team's in a playoff spot." And I'm like, "We're through the looking glass, people." Like, I've got like ardent David Ross supporters now. I never thought I'd see the day.
I like when those people identify themselves so we can quickly mute them. That's what.
It's look, when the Cubs' record is good, you'll see people.
No, that's it exactly.
Defending him, and when the Cubs do poorly, you'll see them disappear.
It's a pile on.
Northwestern football fans, I guess.
Well, I mean, that's not like there's that many of them right now.
Even before this, you know what I'm saying? They were, you never saw the purple hats unless they started off like 3-0 or 4-0.
All the alums like pretended that they didn't go to school there. They throw on like a basic orange hat. No, I'm not actually an Illinois fan. I just wanted you to confuse me with one. By the way, on the Big Ten Country podcast this week, Patrick Neveau comes on to talk about Northwestern football.
We'll get to all your Big Ten plugs here later on in the show.
I like jumping the order with you, man. I love watching your face because you're like, God dang it, not promoting stuff now.
No, we love it. This is why you're here. Promote away. We love it. But we can't get you started promoting because then we'll run out of time because you've got so much stuff to get to. We'll definitely get to it.
I got enough Cubs angst that we need to work out here. So we got like 20 minutes left. I say we continue down that track.
We do, and I am very excited to talk about today's game as of the time of this recording on Labor Day. The San Francisco Giants.
The Cubs will win today. I think Steele's going to come out and pitch really well, and I think he'll go deep, and I think Cubs will beat Logan Webb, who's a good pitcher.
The San Francisco Giants are playing very well coming in here. This is a team that we were looking past because they have 6 games. They have 7 games against Arizona coming up, and we've been talking about that, and we've been glossing over these San Francisco games, and now looking at the standings, becoming very important coming into this as the wild card chases on San Francisco right there, and to have the Cubs have Justin Steele come out, go 8 innings, 2 hits, no runs. Only 2 walks to 12 strikeouts, a career high for the guy who's this podcast pick for the Cy Young, James. I don't know about you, but he's doing real well. He's making a great case.
He's the first Cub left-handed pitcher to go at least 8 innings, strike out 12, and give up no runs and 2 or fewer hits since 1901. So
I feel like that's pretty good. I currently have him. I have him ranked 3rd in the National League right now. I think Blake Snell and Spencer Strider are both having excellent seasons. But man, it feels like any other year, Justin Steele would be a slam dunk top 3 guy, and there's probably 5 or 6 guys in the National League who realistically could argue are in the top 3 right now. This has been a crazy year for pitchers, and heck, for MVP candidates. Cody Bellinger probably isn't even going to sniff the top 5, may not even be top 8, and he's having an outstanding season.
He might not even get comeback player of the year, for God's sake,
What are you going to give it to Christian Yelich? Is that what you're saying?
That was kind of a joke. Yeah, no, of course not. I'm going to give it to Bellinger, but
okay.
I just thought that was funny to pull you in.
No. I just, I was like, this doesn't seem right. This seems like a trap. I'm going to go ahead and stick my foot in the bear trap and see if it goes off. Like, that was kind of what that was.
Blake so why do you think Spencer Strider from the Braves would be a better candidate than Steele? I'm just curious because his ERA is like an entire run higher.
Yeah, I mean, I know that's been kind of the knock on him, and I think that's a very fair criticism and a reason why I think that Steele is going to be at least in the conversation because of that ERA. But when you watch him pitch, like, to me, like when I saw Max Fried pitch in person at Wrigley and was like If he was pitching the whole year like that, this would be a different conversation. I'm just looking at a guy who already has 245 strikeouts and is like average, like his K per 9 innings is like 14 right now, and he's got like a 1.05 whip. Like he's having and 16-4 record, but I'm not like a slave to
as opposed to 16-3.
Well, yeah, exactly. See, I'm not. I think. Truth be told, Steele's 16-3 is more impressive than Strider's 16-4 when you look at literally every guy on the Braves having like 40 home runs. Like that to me, that's a point in Steele's favor. But what I was saying is the raw strikeout stuff and just the complete dominance that he has. Like, yeah, he's the 3.56 ERA is not great, but just that K per 9 ratio, like 14 for a starting pitcher is wild. Like that is so good. Like that's a level of swing and miss that you don't see very often in this game, and that impresses me, quite honestly.
Blake Snell's success.
Although he has a 6-0 lead most of the time, so I mean,
it makes it a lot easier. Well, you would think then he would just pitch to contact. Instead, he does like the exact opposite.
Right.
Blake Snell's success makes San Diego even more baffling every time I look at him. Every time I look at Cincinnati or at San Diego and their plus 62 run differential, the success of Blake Snell, just this team on paper, it's what a head scratcher that they just like aren't in the conversation at all.
They're like the bizarro Miami Marlins, basically. Like you would think that they would be fantastic, and they're just not. And you would think the Marlins would be terrible, and they're still in the playoff hunt. Like nothing makes sense.
If you had told me that Blake Snell would be having the year he's having, and that Michael Wacha would be 11-2 with a 2.85 ERA, and that Joe Musgrove would be 10-3 with a 3.05 ERA, and that Josh Hader would have 28 saves and a 1.13 ERA, I would have told you that the Padres are going to win 105 games.
Yeah.
But yet, they're not going to win 81 games, which is the crazy part, isn't it?
Was it the Brewer pitcher who came close to like losing 20 games? It felt like, wasn't that like Chris Capuano or something had like the preposterously unlucky season? I feel like he's like I think that
who's that young guy from the Mets who lost 20 games, right? Like was it Andrew Young? Somebody young.
It was like it was like Chris or Andrew or somebody.
Yeah, played for the Mets. Might have been Chris Young, but yeah, that's about.
I realized we're helping a lot of people with their immaculate grids, probably at some point.
Right.
The Name Some Dudes podcast here.
So San Francisco, with today's loss, they've now lost 4 in a row, and that helps the Cubs in their wild card standings. But man, I do want to talk about this performance one more time. Just watching Justin Steele. This is the kind of like emotional like this guy knew he had it today and was crushing it and was he was having a great time out there, and this is the stuff you haven't seen a ton of from Steele, and I thought it made it so much fun to watch him getting into how well he was doing today.
Can I just say that I felt like he did that in his last start too, when he like got hit in the leg with the line drive and then proceeded to pitch 6 really good innings. I felt like he got super fired up, and then I loved he ended the 7th inning with a strikeout, got real amped about it, and then proceeded to come back out for the 8th inning. And I was like, this ought to be interesting. Like I feel like he maybe thought he was done, and then Ross was like, no, you go back out there, man. That was great, man. That like you're 1,000% right. Like I was sitting on my couch and I got fired up watching Justin Steele just really emote like that. That was super freaking cool.
And
it was Anthony Young, and he went 1-16.
He was like, I bet Pat's looking this up.
With a 3.77 ERA, by the way. He had an ERA plus of 1.07. He was an above average pitcher. And he went 1-16. He was the opposite of 84 Sutcliffe.
So again, he is the San Diego Padres. Congratulations, Mr. Young.
Yeah.
Well, looking at the rest of the week, we'll preview the week that will be here. The Cubs have 2 more at home against San Francisco before the Diamondbacks come in for 4, and then off to Colorado for 3 and Arizona for 3 more. And then we're down to the last 2 weeks of the season. So this is a big stretch as we look at the standings as of the time of this recording on Labor Day, post-Cubs victory. The Cubs are currently 3 games back with Milwaukee playing at Pittsburgh. And in the wild card, the Cubs have a 3-game lead over Arizona, who's in the last spot, Cincinnati. The Miami Marlins are a half game, and now San Francisco is 1 full game back. So this is an important stretch here as we get into the new wacky playoff format. So people have to remember that there's 3 wild card teams, and the lowest division winner and the 3 wild card teams will play. They will play best of 3 series.
Trying to explain the new playoff format to my grandfather, who's a Diamondbacks fan, was very amusing because he was like, wait a minute, you mean that the Cubs could win the division and they would still have to play a 3-game series? And I was like, yeah.
Yes.
And he's like, so 2 at Wrigley and then 1 something. I'm like, no, 3 at Wrigley potentially. And he's like, what? And then also forget, there are no longer tiebreaker games either. They only use like head-to-head record and stuff. So lots of
Your grandfather was a Diamondbacks fan. How old is he? 35? Like, how does that happen?
So, all right, to set the context, my grandfather grew up in Illinois, moved to Arizona in the 80s, was still a Cubs fan, went to spring training games. He had always said that if Phoenix ever got a team, he would root for the team in Phoenix. He would still, enjoy Cubs games or whatever, but he was like, if we get a hometown team, I want to root for it. And so I will be, an Arizona fan. And they got the Diamondbacks and he jumped on the bandwagon, and that man has never looked back. And when the Cubs lost to them in 2007, you better believe I heard about it a lot.
I don't think you're allowed to do that. I mean, I think you can.
You're going to tell
root for the Diamondbacks as your secondary
team.
team.
Tell my grandfather who served in the Korean War, like, hey, I don't think you're allowed to change your fandom. He'd be like, son, listen.
I mean, he didn't change sides in the Korean War halfway through, did he? This doesn't make sense.
I've been on Ancestry.com a lot lately, and I haven't noticed anything amiss, so I don't think so.
All right, well.
What the hell were we even talking about?
I think it was the week that's coming up, maybe. I don't know.
That's right. Yes, looking ahead to the rest of the before we get to Arizona, because we do have a lot there. We do have San Francisco for 2 more. So you have Walker and Hendricks on Tuesday, and then TBD against Jordan Wicks. And we haven't talked about Jordan Wicks much yet on this podcast here, but between him and Assad, these are 2 guys that just huge, and I feel good now. When I was nervous, I think it's still a small sample size, but I'm pretty excited, James, when these 2 guys are pitching.
Yeah, I think that I've been pleasantly surprised by what Wicks has been able to produce so far. It was so, like, we talked about this a lot, where Tommy Hotovy kind of has this like thing where he'll come out and then the pitcher will immediately do something good. That Pittsburgh game where Wicks made his debut, Hotovy came out and talked to him, and then he 15 straight guys sent down. Like, that was like the ultimate Hotovy moment. The moment just doesn't seem to bother him at all. Like, he seems like he's going to pitch his game no matter what. He knows he's got that incredible changeup. It reminds me a lot of the way that Leiter was using the splitter in like April and May, where he was just like, you can't hit this pitch. I'm just going to keep throwing it because I know you're not going to hit it. Like, that's the attitude he carries with his changeup. And I think it's been on full display, and I love the confidence that he has shown. And then a guy like Kyle Hendricks, who's been, through the ringer before, it's kind of crazy to think that, like, we were discussing, during spring training, like whether he would ever really be the same, like, how they would make room for him in the rotation and stuff. And now I think I might be wrong about this, but I would imagine he's your game 2 starter right now in a playoff series. Like, that to me, what a story that's been. And I have, again, utmost confidence in the way he's been throwing the ball. Like, yeah, he pitches to a lot of contact, but he's been getting plenty of that weak contact too. So it's crazy how confident you're feeling when those 2 guys are on the mound, considering what the Cubs have gone through in their rotation this season. And yeah, I fully anticipate that they'll be competitive in those games when those guys are pitching.
Well, I will say that it's been a revelation to watch Javier Assad. I mean, that 8-inning no runs he gave up against Rays. He didn't get the win because of the Cubs blew it in the ninth, but he's come out now. I know he's only started 7 games so far for the Cubs, but he's thrown 87 innings because he was coming out of the bullpen before that. And I think after his first game or two on the team where he got roughed up a little bit, he's been nearly perfect. I mean, his last 7 or 8 weeks, he's been fantastic. And I don't know where the Cubs would be without him, but would it be where they are now? It would be much worse. So he's been fantastic, and I think somebody who the Cubs are going to, like you say, also have to rely on down the stretch here. And depending on how things end up the rest of the season, it kind of informs maybe some of your decision making for next year. You got to start thinking about what are you going to do if Marcus Stroman's gone? You're going to have some spots in the rotation. Hendricks will probably, despite pitching well this year, I don't think he'll probably be back next year. So where does that leave you? And the way Wisniewski and others have maybe not carried their weight as much as we'd hoped. I think the Assads and the Wicks are certainly in a position to kind of fight their way into the rotation and take over some spots at the bottom of it. So.
And Wisniewski's been really solid in the bullpen too, and it's just kind of one of those things where, I feel like they're going to give him another shot and be like, look, if you can learn to retire lefties consistently, you can pitch in this rotation. And he's got the stuff for it. But I mean, after next season, if he doesn't lock a spot down, I'm okay with him being in that Keegan Thompson role where it's literally no, you're not starting. We're going to use you in this specific way, and you'll be useful. But yeah, that was weird. And I'm glad you mentioned Assad too. I feel like that's a guy that I almost pencil him into the rotation next year at this point. Just, it's amazing he didn't win a spot out of camp and then has come in and made such a massive impact down the stretch for this team. You can't say enough good things about the way he approaches things.
Wisniewski, to your point, has had such amazingly different splits, against right-handed batters, of which most people are right-handed, I think. I'm not, but others are. He's pitching at a Cy Young caliber, and against lefties, he looks like he's facing Babe Ruth in his prime every time up because he's so bad against lefties. It's rare that you see somebody who's had as many plate appearances against both lefties and righties as he's had this year. The splits are pretty even. It's not like he's only facing righties or only facing lefties. It's pretty evenly split, and he's twice as good against righties as lefties, or vice versa, twice as bad against lefties. From a 553 OPS against righties to a 1.013 OPS against lefties. And if he could even be just not even good against lefties, if he could just be bad against lefties as opposed to completely terrible, just bad, just I have an 800 OPS against lefties, he would significantly improve his overall numbers here, which is crazy.
And I think he'd be in the rotation right now, just all things considered. I don't know if Jordan Wicks would be up if Wisniewski was, usable in that role. He just isn't right now.
Right.
Well, James, I haven't seen a ton of Arizona this year. I know. So looking at this upcoming series, what are some things that Cubs fans like me who haven't seen a ton of Arizona should be watching for? What are things we should be concerned about or excited to see here in the upcoming series?
I think one of the things I would tell you to kind of keep an eye out for with the Diamondbacks is just they're a team that's got so many interesting young players. They're a team they have a similar vibe, I would almost say, to the Cincinnati Reds, where it's they have a lot of young guys who are kind of coming into the mix and are doing some really remarkable things. When you watch a guy like Alec Thomas manning center field, you're going to get PCA vibes from that guy. He chases down balls he absolutely has no business catching. He is astonishing to watch in the outfield. He is a lot of fun. Christian Walker, I know that, Arizona fans are pretty, I can't even say the word. I was going to say acclimated. There we go. Acclimated.
There it is.
To having good first baseman, good first base production. Christian Walker has 65 extra base hits this season. He is a machine at the plate, drawing 55 walks, really good on base percentage for being, a good power hitter. And then I can't say enough about Corbin Carroll. Like, that's a dude that is appointment watching for me. I think he's got like a +5 WAR this season. He has, I think it's 21 home runs this season. He's got 41 stolen bases. Lots of attention being paid to Acuna with the 30 homers and 60 stolen bases. Corbin Carroll's doing some pretty remarkable stuff in that way too. So, and then that's not even mentioning a guy like Zach Gallen, who's potentially going to be in that Cy Young conversation too. Like, the Diamondbacks have had some incredible individual performances and a lot of guys that they've developed through their system and are now arriving. That's a team that's going to really theoretically give teams like the Dodgers a big, challenge in the years to come. And I think that those types of young guys, I think they're going to be around for a while. And yeah, I'd let Cubs fans know that the Diamondbacks are not a team that's, going to be a pushover because they maybe don't have like the biggest star power in the league. Like, I wouldn't say Christian Walker is like a massive star in this game, but they've got some really talented players that are really going to turn your head both in terms of what they do at the plate and defensively.
I think your grandfather paid you to say that. So I'm going to give the opposite, not the opposing view, I guess, like the half glass empty full for the Diamondbacks. Yeah, Zach Gallen's decent. He's no Justin Steele, but he's a decent pitcher. He's good. Merrill Kelly's pretty good. Sadly, the Cubs have to face both of them in this 4-game upcoming series. But the rest of the rotation is trash, and the Cubs will get to see that too. The bullpen is very unsettled. You think the Cubs have bullpen issues. These guys don't have a closer at all. They don't know what they're doing.
Closers don't exist, yeah.
Yeah, they can hit, right? So we'll see how that plays out. And we'll see how Kyle Hendricks does with his 14 different types of changeups against a team that can hit. And we'll see Steele go up against him, which will be a good test for him. Sadly, we'll also see Teon go up against him, which could be problematic. And then Assad as well. So it'll be fun to watch this series. They're a good team and yet a flawed team. And much like the Cubs. Yeah, much like the Cubs, a lot depends on how they can manage their weaknesses as much as their strengths.
All I was gonna say was, gee, I've heard this story before. It's a team that wears blue pinstripes. Who was that?
Again, this is why we're the best pre-game show in the business, because we will take you all the way to your pre-game show by giving you all this additional insight and analysis leading into the game. So I'm very excited for this homestand, for the Cubs to put some distance between themselves in Arizona and San Francisco, and hopefully go into that week against Colorado and be able to, if we lose one in Colorado, not have the same panic that we've seen in the past weekend in Cincinnati. So this is the time in the show where we have to do our predictions. Pat, you nailed it last week. I was a bit optimistic at 5-2. They easily could have been 5-2. They easily could have been 2-5. But
or 6-1 even.
Or 6-1. It was a very we were it was good, but you nailed it with your prediction. So we will start with you first, and then we'll go to James.
Yeah.
So
I'm writing. Is this a 4-week win streak here? Or 5 weeks in a row I've been right. So I hope I'm wrong this week.
So we're gonna do the 6 games, the 6-game homestand.
Yeah. Okay. Well, 7. San Francisco and Arizona, right?
So yeah, we've already said that.
Just give them a win by default then?
Well, they've already won today, so.
Right. So I count that as part of the 7.
Yes.
I'll count that as a win.
Correct.
In my
good thing.
I'm not gonna predict against history.
I recommend this.
So, thank you. I think the Cubs are going to go 4-3 this week, which means 3-3 the rest of the week. They could very easily go 5-2 because I could see them winning 4 out of the next 6. But I also, looking at some of the matchups, I think there are a couple games in here that the Cubs are very unlikely to win. But beside that, I think, there are going to be a couple toss-ups and a couple I think they're going to be favored in. But I will say 4-3. I will tell you this. If the Cubs do end up 5-2 this week against the Giants in Arizona, you can pretty much lock the Cubs in for no less than a wild card, because I think we're at the point of the season where it gets harder and harder to catch up. And after this week, the Cubs do have that little stretch where they play 12 games and 3 against Arizona, but 9 against teams that have quit in Colorado and Pittsburgh. So that's kind of nice. Like, you're going to have a really soft, schedule if you can get past these 7 games. Over 500 ideally, but 5-2 would be even more, I think, telling. But I will err on the side of a conservative prediction and say 4-3.
James, what do you think?
I'm going to be a little more aggressive. I think that the Cubs are in a position where they could potentially build off the momentum of their last 2 games, and I think they're going to finish off a sweep of the Giants. And then I think they're going to come back to earth a little bit and frustrate fans with at least one really stupid loss during the upcoming series against Arizona. So I'm going to say split against Arizona, sweep the Giants. So I think that would put me at 5-2 for the week for the Chicago Cubs. And as Pat said, this is a golden opportunity to potentially put at least one of these teams into a really bad position in terms of catching them, because you already have the 3.5 game lead. You've got some cushion built up. Now's the time to go for the kill if you're the Chicago Cubs. And I think that that's going to be, critically important for them to do that. So I am going to go with a 5-2 record this week. And I do believe, gentlemen, the Cubs are only 2.5 out in the division now because Milwaukee lost to Pittsburgh tonight.
Huge. Wow.
Yep.
So the division still within play. I agree that they will split with the Diamondbacks. I think that that's a very reasonable thing. I'm trying to get myself there to a sweep against San Francisco. I'm feeling 2-1, but then I can get there. I can get you. You've almost sold me on the sweep, James. I'm kind of excited about the thing. So I got aggressive last week and it bit me. I'm gonna tone it down. I'm gonna say 4-3. I'm gonna go with the. They're gonna go 2-1 against San Francisco and a split against Arizona. I do like the start times. The Thursday start time. So the Tuesday start time and the Thursday start time both 6:40 start times Central Time. So
must be a fall thing.
Why is that? Is that a new thing this year? It is a new thing this year.
Well,
because it's after Labor Day. That's right. So
yes,
they're going back to the pre-Memorial Day, post-Labor Day. They're going to go back to. I like the 6:40 starts. Right.
And they're also on TBS tomorrow. I don't know if that had anything to do with them going with that specific time, but I think Pat might be right about the Labor Day thing.
Yeah, looking at the rest of the season, it's 6:40 for home night games, which is only 25 minutes difference. But considering the pitch clock, that's like a couple innings. It really. You'll be in the 3rd inning or done with the 3rd inning by the time the game would have started. So it's some early nights.
I feel whenever they're on TBS, they should start at 6:05. So that's the week that will be. We are running up against time already. We've got our predictions in. Is there anything else you want to touch on, Pat, before we let James go and call it a podcast?
No, I just say congratulations to the Cubs on making it through this last week. And if they can persevere one more week, I think we're going to be looking at some October baseball, and that's really exciting.
James, please remind all of our listeners where they can find your work on all your podcasts and via various forms of the internet.
Before I get to the plugs, I will pay some penance and give you guys a little bit more comedy. We were talking about the Guardians earlier and how they had, made this big potential playoff push and gotten all those pitchers. All Lucas Giolito did today was give up 9 earned runs, and they're losing 20-3 to the Twins today. So really well executed, Cleveland. Bravo. That was just masterful use of the waiver wire.
They're the Angels of the Central Division.
Guardians in the outfield. I thank you for having me on again, boys. It's always a lot of fun. I do co-host the Cubs Talk podcast for NBC Sports Chicago. So if you're not over my stupid Cubs conversation talk and tactics and stuff, you can go catch me there. I also host the Big Ten Country podcast for NBC Sports Chicago, covering college sports. First week of football season just wrapped up. Had a really great episode with my new co-host, Kenneth Davis. He is absolutely fantastic. He also covers the Bears for our station. So just a great sports mind, and really thrilled to be doing that show with him. And yeah, we record on Sundays and Wednesdays. So if you want your Big Ten football fix, come to this.
I gave that show a listen, and it seems like you guys have been podcasting for a long time. I was this is surprising to see that this is a new show. You guys already had pretty good chemistry.
I had been hosting the show solo since June and had done all like the preview episodes and stuff by myself, and it had like a few guest hosts here and there. But yeah, Ken and I have now done 2 episodes together, and yeah, I completely agree with you. Like it makes it so easy having a co-host that you just vibe with immediately. And yeah, I think the world of him and can't say enough good things.
Excellent, and definitely make sure you're following James on X and or Twitter, as we're going to continue to Sears Tower this one and call it Twitter. So you can also follow us on all social media platforms at Wrigleyville Nat. And the same thing for Instagram, Threads, X, Twitter. We're on all those things at WrigleyvilleNet, Facebook.com/WrigleyvilleNation as well. And the only reason we can bring you this show ad-free, I can do an hour podcast with these 2 guys right here without stopping to do commercials, is because of our patrons over at patreon.com/WrigleyvilleNation. Without our patrons, we wouldn't be able to do that. So thank you very much for continuing this whole season, keeping us ad-free, and every little bit helps. So every single penny that you donate goes right back into the show. If you can't support the show financially in these times, we understand that as well. Tell your Cub fan friends about the show. There's meaningful Chicago Cubs baseball happening in September. You will have baseball fans that are asking questions about the Cubs, wanting to talk to you about baseball. Make sure you tell them how to subscribe to the podcast. Show them we're on every podcatcher of choice. So continue to stay subscribed as the Cubs get to the playoffs. We're doing more. We'll end up doing more than just one podcast a week. We come as needed. So make sure you stay subscribed. That's the best way to never miss an episode. And with that, we're going to wrap it up. We're going to call the show. Pat, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thanks, James. Thanks, everyone, for listening. And we'll talk to you again next time.